everyone. I'm Clara Wallace, and I'm the Assistant Director of Talks here at 6th and I. Whether you're here with us in person or watching virtually from home, on behalf of 6th and I and our partners, Politics and Prose Bookstore, thank you for being with us tonight and for your support of a nonprofit and an independent bookstore. By show of hands, is this your first time at 6th and I? Amazing. For those who are new, this building dates back to 1908. It was a synagogue for 45 years, and then home to an AME church for the next 50. When the church relocated and put the building up for sale, the highest bid was from someone who wanted to turn it into a nightclub. It was saved within 24 hours, and we recently marked our 20th anniversary as a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. It's been nearly a decade since we last hosted Chuck Palahniuk to speak about Make Something Up, Stories You Can't Unread, his first collection of stories. And it's my pleasure to introduce him and welcome him back to 6th and I. That evening, Chuck read Guts, which had become one of his most infamous stories due to the graphic nature of its content and because it caused many people to faint at his readings, including a few here in this very sanctuary. Our hope is that everyone stays upright tonight. Among Chuck's many novels are the best-selling Snuff, Rant, Haunted, Lullaby, and of course, Fight Club, which was made into a film by director David Fincher 25 years ago. In an interview, Chuck has said that a goal of writing is to make people laugh and then to break their heart. There is a visceral quality to his writing that engages readers on a physical level, with stories that involve sex, violence, illness, or drugs. The physical awareness of the characters Chuck brings to life is heightened and is a hallmark of his craft. Chuck's writings also include works of nonfiction, a graphic novel, a writing guide, and coloring books. Tonight we're here to celebrate the release of Shock Induction, a dark, satirical parable about a string of mysterious high school disappearances, the seedy underbellies of billionaires, and the tough choices we make in the face of an uncertain future. In a high school only Chuck Palahniuk could imagine, students must choose between the risk of following their dreams or the security of money and a lifetime of servitude to the world's wealthiest and most elite. Chuck is eager to take your questions, so by design, the second half of the program will be dedicated to audience Q&A, so be thinking of your questions. You can line up at the microphones in either aisle at that time. Thank you all again for joining us. Please help me give Chuck Palahniuk a warm welcome to 6th and I.
What I remember about last time reading here was that I read the short story, The Facts of Life, where a father is trying to explain to his very young son where babies come from. And I did not realize I was going to be reading it here, and I had completely forgotten that it had a joke in it about circumcision. The punchline of which was, genital mutilation is genital mutilation no matter how you slice it. And I was too far along to get past. So tonight I'd like to read two stories. Neither one is Guts. The first story is called Commencement. Commencement. Welcome to you, the graduating class of 2023. Go Wildcats. Go green and gold. By now, most of you have got your sweaty little mitts on your high school yearbook and you've made the rounds. The popular among you, you've got the most signatures, a buttload of variations on "to the sweetest person ever" and "have a great summer" and "don't ever change." That scribbled in pen across senior portraits and team photos. And the washouts among you, you managed to get some pity quotes scribbled in your books by some feel-sorry teachers. But what none of you grasp is that you are all leaving money on the table. Big money. Look around, why don't you? Anymore, every graduating class has an oddball, at least one. And not to point fingers, but that quiet kid who nobody asked to sign their annual, his signature will be worth a king's ransom in a couple years. A 1978 Revere annual, for example. If you get your mitts on one with a "have a nice summer" scribbled by Jeffrey Dahmer, your ship has come in. Or a 1953 Terre Haute Renegade with a "don't ever change" scribbled by one Charles Miles Manson. To buy that book would set you back at least 10 grand. In closing, I just want to nudge you a little. Go out and seek that kid who peed brown poop out of his butt from bad hot lunch in second grade. That kid is a powder keg. Say you're sorry you laughed, and ask for his autograph, just in case. And in closing, may I call your attention to one Stacy Keller, a student who graduated here, go Wildcats, so far back that she took as her role model Farrah Fawcett Majors, a Charlie's Angel hitched to the Bionic Man, the only angel that most people can name, even if she walked off that show after the first season. And she made a poster to prove that you don't need big boobs. You only need a bright smile and one big nipple. And hair, the blonde strands of which spell out the word sex and a subliminal message down your back. And the world will beat a path to your door. Anyway, Stacy Keller knelt at the altar of everything Farrah Fawcett on account of, before Farrah, if a girl got a hickey sucked on her neck, a big purple hickey, or even wore a bandage on her neck or wore a turtleneck sweater, that girl might as well find herself a pimp. No boy in good standing would look twice at her. That's where Farrah, wearing her flip-back bangs, comes in. Farrah put an electric curling iron in the hands of every girl in America. And going forward, a girl could show up for class with hickeys, even hickeys with teeth marks or herpes sores or big honking HPV on her neck, and say it was from a curling iron. It's a curling iron burn. So in that one small way, Farrah Fawcett saved the human race from extinction. In closing, Farrah was on that show for one season. And still, if you asked, what's a Charlie's Angel? No one is going to say Kate Jackson. Nobody sure as hell going to say Cheryl Ladd. It's only Mother Nature that after Lee Majors, she married Ryan O'Neal, who's the only other most beautiful blonde person ever. As for acting, she made people swallow the idea of her in love with Kirk Douglas, not a young, hot Kirk Douglas or Michael Douglas, but old dinosaur Kirk Douglas. In the film Saturn III, leathery old Spartacus himself, when most people found most people found the killer robot who stuck the needle in Farrah's eye to be more doable. Back in the day, America only included two kinds of people: people in the Farrah Fawcett camp versus people in the Susan Anton camp, with the exception of maybe one fag who'd side with Bo Derek. But then Susan Anton turned into a Nazi-engineered genetic time bomb who went crazy in Golden Girl, while Farrah got abused by an abusive husband and set him on fire in bed. So that's why even you college prep honor students of the class of 2023, you are asking yourself, who is Susan Anton? And in closing, rest assured that someday you too will worship the people who were hot when you were hot. Even if it's Magda Gabor or Bess Meyerson, someday you will go to YouTube and sit through a commercial for age-related macular degeneration and a commercial for arthritis before you can watch your favorite Communards video. But not Farrah. For her whole entire life, Stacy Keller knelt at the altar of everything Farrah, because Farrah Fawcett always stayed the same level of hot as the videos that MTV could only play after 11 o'clock. It might interest you to hear that back in the day, this town suffered a rash of dog disappearances, all of them house pets, sweet little breeds like Jack Russell Terriers and Chihuahuas. Somebody snatched these dogs out of backyards and out of cars and threw these toy poodles into the meat grinder of dogfighting rings in the unincorporated part of the county. They tossed the Yorkies and Corgis, nice, friendly dogs, into a pit for the other dogs to tear to pieces. The dogs that didn't shred the little dogs, the trainers fed them to the bigger dogs until it was just the biggest, baddest dogs that they had left to fight each other. By the time Stacy Keller could grasp what had taken place, her King Charles Spaniel was already torn to pieces. So when Stacy Keller's dog disappeared, she asked herself, what would Farrah do? Stacy Keller, who sat where you are sitting right now and who cheered at Wildcat pep rallies. Stacy Keller brought home a Pomeranian, and she let it run loose in her backyard, and when some guy lured it to the fence and made a grab for that dog, Stacy Keller jumped out of the lilac bush and she hosed his face with a big can of bug spray, just like Farrah Fawcett would. She grabbed this big dummy, blinded by the bug spray, and she dragged him into her house, and she got him into her big stone fireplace and lashed the headboard of an old brass bed across the front of the fireplace to make a jail cell right there in her living room, because that is what Farrah Fawcett had done. Stacy Keller, who nobody noticed in school and who probably wasn't asked to autograph anybody's yearbook, she got that big blind dummy's phone and she demanded how to unlock it. The guy was shouting, false imprisonment and kidnapping. Stacy Keller couldn't give a shit. She asked for the names of his dogfighting crew so she could text them. And rattling the brass bed bars of his fireplace jail cell, the dummy called her a stupid bitch. And he yelled at him and his friends and his associates. They were going to come back there and they were going to pull a train on her stupid bitch ass. And in closing, you need to grasp that Stacy had something that even Farrah Fawcett didn't. Stacy had a little switch on the wall, and she flipped it. The fireplace made a click, click, click sound, and out came the smell of natural gas. The bug spray dummy, he shook his brass prison bars and scrambled to climb the narrow chimney, his hands clawing down soot off the bricks. And then the fire caught, and the flames jumped up to his bug-sprayed clothes and his hair, and you never heard such screams. Just from the fear, the dummy pissed out the fire. He slapped out the flames on his face. He broke his teeth chewing on those brass bars. Stacy Keller asked again, nice, how to unlock his phone. She asked the names of his dog-fighting associates. She stood with one hand on the fireplace switch because that's what Farrah Fawcett would do. Blisters were coming up all over this burned-up dummy, coated in soot and piss. Stacy flipped the switch just to put the fear of hell into him, that click, click, click. The guy blurted out his passcode, and she unlocked his phone. He begged her, please. She wrote down the names that he told her and looked up their numbers on the phone. And in closing, you'll be happy to hear that Stacy flipped that switch one last time. The burning alive big dummy must have shook the whole house trying to get out. He clawed up the chimney and fell back down into the flames. He pissed and spit and shit and bled so much, his blood put out the fire. But Stacy had electronic ignition. Another click, 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 and he was back in hell, thrashing and scorched, with the cooked skin coming off him against the rough stonework. His eyeballs popped from the heat, and of course the screams didn't go on for too long before he sounded just like another animal getting killed by another animal. And in closing, Stacy cleaned out her fireplace and gave the good bones to her new dog. She texted the first name on her list and texted that he should drop by and help to pull a train on some dumb bitch. And she had the bug spray handy. Stacy Keller, she wasn't a patch on Jeffrey Dahmer, but she played a superpowered, avenging Charlie's Angel, a woman with the power to fake fuck a leathery Spartacus for 2 hours and bail off a hit Aaron Spelling series after just one season. And that is what separates the Farrahs from the Bo Derricks. And in closing, Stacy Keller worked through her entire list. No more dogs got stolen. Dog fighting disappeared from this town. And in closing, that's what I want for you. For you to be the biggest bitch that kills the big dogs, that kill the littlest dogs. And in closing, I want for you to open the window so the whole neighborhood can hear that justice is being done, and so that all the dogs can howl along with the tortured screams. And in closing, whatever life throws at you, whatever problems you face, I want you should ask yourself, why don't you? What would Farrah do? Everyone, please, autograph everyone's annuals. And in closing, go Wildcats. That was Commencement. I'm kind of fascinated by anecdotal stories about how really remarkable things get written really quickly. One of my favorite anecdotes is John Denver wrote about writing Annie's Song, which everyone in my generation got married to Annie's Song. Everyone, Annie's Song. And he said that he wrote Annie's Song. One day, he had an enormous fight with his wife, Annie, and he had to get out of the house, and so he took the ski lift to the top of a mountain, and in the short time it took to reach the peak of the mountain, he had written the entire song. And so often after that, I found that so many of the things I like the most are typically things that were written in a very very small amount of time. I wrote chapter 6 of Fight Club, which was originally a short story called Fight Club. And it was just an experiment to see if I could use rules as a way to transition within fiction. And so I wrote that one day during my lunch break at Freightliner. And so in less time than it took to eat my lunch, my entire life changed. About 45 minutes to write that story. But I find that really the stories that I end up loving the most and the stories that I find land the best with people are stories that just seem to come out of thin air, just seem to be kind of dictated through me. And this summer, I was out in the woods. We had a bear this year, so I spent a lot of time in the woods guarding the bird feeders and doing mushrooms. And the bears heard this story a lot. Thank God. So, it's a story called What I Learned Over My Summer Vacation. What I learned over my summer vacation. Dear Mr. Sparks, teacher extraordinaire, by which I mean you, Mr. Sparks, my fifth period English teacher, who likes for us to practice our vocabulary, by which I mean, hey, I've already burned up 39 of the required 500-word minimum. My summer vacation really started around baseball season when I brought my mom an ad from the internet, a help wanted ad. My mom was watching a Jimmy Dean's breakfast sandwich go around in the microwave. She took my phone and she scrolled down the screen while my mom read out loud, "Paid interns wanted for the summer." She looked at me. She read, $30 an hour. She kept reading. Wanted. Curious, caring junior high school students. Spend your summer as a paid intern. Meet face to face with influential leaders from international business and politics. Practice skills that transcend the language barrier while learning the hands-on, care-driven, ancient art of bodywork. My mom read out loud, passport required. At the breakfast table, I repeat, $30 an hour. To which my Nana, my old ancient Nana, she says, "What profits a man if he should gain the entire world but lose his everlasting soul?" And isn't that what poor people always say? By which I mean, you never hear Elon Musk say it. No, it's always old people who've worked at dairy freeze their entire lives, and they're still dirt poor, but now they're old and dying. So their fallback position of old poor people like my Nana is, well, at least I'm going to heaven. And for pushback, I tell my Nana, ouch, by which I mean zing. And the Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwich dings in the microwave, and my mom says, criminy. She says, the kid is 13 years old. Let him make his own goddamn mistakes. And what nobody says is that without a job, I'm just going to sit around my mom's apartment all summer. And most likely my Nana is going to croak in her dirty diapers while I'm stinking up my mom's sofa with Pornhub. And here we are, halfway home, Mr. Sparks, by which I mean that is 300 words. Over breakfast, we text my dad. My dad texts my mom with, "Is this something you cooked up, Beth?" To which my mom texts back, "Don't pretend you care now." And on the next joint custody weekend, my dad takes me to the post office for a passport. To expedite the passport takes a couple extra bucks, but while we wait, he tells me this idea he has for a really good poem. The travel. The travel goes easy peasy, by which I mean my mom gets me to the airport. At the departure gate, she asks, "Are you sure you wouldn't rather look after your Nana this summer?" By which she means changing diapers until September, then all the while hoping that Nana dies. To which I say, $30, duh. I played Tomb Raider for about 1,000,000 levels on the airplane, and when we land, my teen leader greets me at the gate and whisks me off to meet one-on-one and face-to-face with influential world leaders. And that is how I spent my summer vacation. Or at least that's the part you really want to hear about. Yeah, that's 630 words, give or take. My guess is that right here is where most of you people would like to see the story end. And by most of you people, I mean the school board and the PTA, and you, Mr. Sparks, and your wife, Mrs. Sparks. By which I mean, I have business acumen now. By which I mean, my teen leader taught me that nothing is ever off the table, Mr. Sparks. To start with, I can tell you how a paid internship overseas is not like Bethesda Consolidated Junior High School. When you go to learn the secrets of ancient hands-on bodywork, they give you a teen leader who's the coolest, buffest, bossest older high schooler that you ever wanted for an older brother. By which I mean a big brother who can kick ass in kendo and hapkido and every mixed martial art. And your teen leader collects you at the airport in Vancouver and drives you around in a Tesla Cybertruck, a Tesla, to see the National Palace, and then snaps pictures of your grinning face in front of the Colonial Palace and texts your mom and your dad and posts on Facebook about 1,000,000 goofy pictures of you eating the best street food pangolin of your entire life on the best day of your life. And pangolin's not this creepy naked armadillo you expected, but it's really delicious, really, really delicious. And by now, your teen leader has enough stupid, happy snapshots to post for the rest of your summer internship. So he asks if he can hold your passport and your telephone just for safekeeping, mind you. Besides, it's been a long trip. And what with the airplane ride and the sightseeing and eating so much pangolin, you're starting to get really, really sleepy. Like so sleepy, your team leader has to carry you back to the Tesla and has to lay you sideways across the bed of the pickup before you conk out completely. And with all of those grinning pictures, nobody back home is going to believe that you did not have the best summer vacation any kid ever had. And that's what I did with my summer vacation, Mr. Sparks. Sorry to go on so long. As a 7th grade English teacher, you probably have a life and kids, and you can't spend all night grading papers, especially not from some stupid kid who wants to score extra brownie points and just keeps writing on and on. No. Nobody wants to hear what happens next. So maybe I should just hit the high points, make a bullet point list like you taught us so we can all go back to reading J.D. Salinger and Lord of the Flies. But if you're still reading, I will tell you that having a teen leader is rough at first. By which I mean a teen leader who knows martial arts and takes you under his wing and does tough love, but a teen leader really does have your back. By which I mean a teen leader won't just microwave you some dinosaur macaroni and cheese and call that dinner. And a teen leader is not some manager at Dairy Freeze who stands with his hands on his hips, lording over you while he yells, "What kind of a stupid fuck doesn't know how to change a goddamn CO2 canister?" And no teen leader is ever going to say, "Daddy needs to work a double, so he can't be at your soccer game." And no teen leader is ever going to say, "Mommy wants to live with Brian, so from now on she's going to be your weekend mommy." No. No, a good teen leader is your best friend, by which I mean a good teen leader teaches you how to work the nipples. Boom. Right there, we've just hit 1,200 words. But for extra credit, I'll tell you that a teen leader is better than any father, by which I mean my father, who still lives in a world where Joni Mitchell has said everything worth saying. By which I mean, when you take a paid internship overseas and your teen leader meets you at the airport and makes sure that you have 3 squares of fried pangolin every day, delicious pangolin, not some shitty microwave Jimmy Dean pangolin. No, when you have a teen leader and somebody hurts you, your teen leader will step up to the edge of the mattress and shout, "He only little boy! You know fuck so hard!" By which I mean, when an influential international business leader says, "Hey, Chinaman, I paid for a full half hour," your teen leader will say nothing. Your teen leader will only pull out his knife and step across that mattress, and the next thing you know, you and the intern from Germany and the interns from Denmark and Bangladesh, you're all repainting that little room, and you're laughing about the funny gurgling sounds that rich men make when they finish, or when you know they choke to death on their own blood. By which I mean, no, Mr. Sparks, this was not written by AI. By which I mean, when you're a paid intern in Fangcourt, you know you're getting fed, and in Fangcourt they care if you're sick and not well, and you won't catch anything, by which I mean AIDS, by which I mean that wealthy tourists who come here from Annapolis and Lisbon, they're more afraid of you than you are of them. Tourists who come here from Dubai and Stuttgart, they're not looking to take home any souvenirs to the wife and kids. Take it or leave it. A teen leader is always looking out for you. And that's 1,900 words. That's it. That's the end. By which I mean, I did such a great job as a paid intern that next summer they've asked me back to be a teen leader. And they're teaching me mixed martial arts and letting me have a knife and more money, by which I mean teen leaders make $60 an hour. And I'll be the first kid in my freshman class at Bethesda Consolidated to buy a Tesla, and to buy my mom a Tesla, and my cup floweth over. By which I mean, while I was gone, my Nana died. By which I mean, when you have enough money, who needs an immortal soul anyhow? I came home with $136,000 American. And if you want to know the hourly breakdown on that, you do the math. By which I mean, American tax law says no taxes due on income under $180,000 earned on foreign soil, and that's American tax law for you. By which I mean, ka-ching. By which I mean, Mr. Sparks, I have had death point his finger at me, and I have heard death say, How much for the little one? And I've had death panting over me, and death has finished bareback inside of me, Mr. Sparks. Yet I am not dead, Mr. Sparks. No, I am not dead. And now we're all safe at home in Bethesda, by which I mean you, me, everybody. And my future is pretty much all mapped out, by which I mean I know what you did over your summer vacation, Mr. Sparks. It's a small world. Here it is, October in Bethesda, Maryland, Mr. Sparks. And just because you've read Joseph Conrad, you think you can lecture us about some heart of darkness, you with your long summer vacations. By which I mean, I know why you went to Estonia the summer before last, and Thailand the summer before that, Mr. Sparks. You with your pompous demands of 5,000 words on my desk by Friday, no excuses, and show your work, and no AI. By which I mean, I want $1,000 cash from you, payable for every hour of mindless boredom you make me sit through. American dollars. By which I think you know what I mean, Mr. Sparks. As for my mom knows, but she doesn't know. By which I mean, when she was dropping me off at the airport, she told me that she could never sit down. The whole time my mom was in labor when I was born. When she was in labor, she just kept walking around and around the hospital, walking around and around. Even when her water broke, she kept tracking wet footprints around and around, up and down every corridor of the hospital. And the nurses kept telling her, Beth, Mrs. Finkelstein, you just have to rest. But my mom, she just kept walking and walking, and she walked and walked and walked and walked and walked. And that's what she told me at the airport when she told me goodbye. By which she meant that she understood, my mom. She understood about my going to be a paid intern doing spiritual healing body work, because she knew that the world is a terrible, dirty place, but that a kid just needs to get out and make his own mistakes. By which she meant that it's not what happens to us that counts. It's what we do with what's left of us afterwards. By which I mean $1,000 on my desk, by the bell, every day, no excuses. By which I mean I know the ropes, Mr. Sparks, and I am not dead, not yet. And when all else fails, whether it is Elon Musk or Hunter Biden or Donald Trump, whoever walks through that door at the end of the day, when all else fails, Mr. Sparks, you are not dead, but you just might have to work the nipples. That was what I learned over my summer vacation. There's supposed to be a little timer up here to show me the time, but I don't find it. Are we at half hour? Okay, so I guess now we're going to do Q&A. So if you got questions, let me hear them.
Hi, is this thing on? Hi, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Just a quick question for you. I just wanted to preface it by saying when I started out as a Cub news reporter in Gresham, Oregon, I thought I might have an illustrious career one day writing fiction. And somebody was asking me about a good story idea, and I'm like, I don't know, I wasted my weekend. I didn't find the time to do it. And one Sharon Nesbitt from across the newsroom shouted, "Do you know you're sitting at goddamn Chuck Palahniuk's old desk?" And I said,
Yeah,
"No."
is Sharon still working there?
She is still there.
Oh, damn.
And I said, "No, I didn't know that." And she said, "Yeah, no pressure." When you write these stories, both of these are great examples. In closing, saying that repeatedly through the story, or by which I mean. When you're drafting these stories, are you just starting and going purely intuitively? Or do you have that picked out as a tool or a strategy in advance that you want to work with in the manuscript? I mean, do you come to it intuitively, or is it more premeditated?
You know, when I do a short story, my teacher, my best teacher, Tom Spanbauer, God bless, he just died 2 weeks ago, and we're still all a little shaky. You know, we thought we'd have Tom for the rest of our lives. But Tom he studied minimalism under Gordon Lish at Columbia. And a lot of minimalism was about presenting stories not the way a writer would tell a story, but the way a person would tell a story. And in AA, oh my God, those people are storytellers. It's not like you're listening to Tolstoy. It's not like you're listening to the Russians. You're listening to people who are there to tell a story and to try to make it captivating. And so Lish's minimalism is that way of trying to get a really intimate, burned, incorrect language that expresses the emotion, and that you can kind of ratchet up the momentum of the language as you need it to go faster or slower, or you need a hard break. And what I bring to it is I try to make a story like a song. If I have to read it out loud, it has to read like I'm singing you a song. And so that's why I need a little drum machine. And in my best songs, the first rule of Fight Club that's my transitional device, is the rules of Fight Club. It acts like a little 80s drum machine. And as growing up in the 80s, a drum machine is that beat you can always fall back on. And in closing, and in all the stories I find that work the best out loud, I come up with a little phrase that's organic. It just emerges in the story. It makes itself present, and I realize that's the little bit of transition that I need, and it's going to become invisible because it's such a banal phrase, by which I mean. And then it's going to become a kind of loaded phrase because people will recognize it's a stand-up. It's going to introduce something stronger. Years ago, do you know the singer Lisa Loeb? I had to do a big poetry slam, a writer's slam with her at the Texas Festival of the Book. And it was in this massive movie palace. And we didn't have any prep for it. Each of these, like 4 writers, were going to present something from a brand new novel, and we were supposed to judge them and say really catty, awful things about them. It was just that kind of slam thing. And Lisa Loeb was sitting next to me. She was just before me for each round. And I got this idea, and I asked Todd to call my cell phone. And I kept my cell phone on because when you have your phone and it goes off during things like that, everyone hates you. And so we worked out a little tell where I would go like this, and Todd would dial my number. And then the phone would go off, and everyone would be in an uproar about who didn't turn off their phone. And then it would be me. And I could pretend to take a call. And I took calls from everyone who had just died that year. So I took a Steve Jobs call. I took an Amy Winehouse call. But after the first time we did it, people in the audience recognized the tell because with the satellite relay, Todd had to call my number. I had to signal him almost a full minute before the call would come through. So as soon as I started going like this, nobody heard a word that Lisa Loeb was saying. They were all just roaring because they knew that I was signaling some secret person, call me, call me, call me. And so when you develop these little phrases like, and in closing, then you're signaling people that we're moving on to a different aspect of the story. And we're changing scenes temporally, we're gonna jump around in time. And so for what I think are my most effective stories, they all involve a repeated, very banal phrase like that allows me to cut the story the way a film editor would cut film. And it also works into comics, because comics are cut very much the same way as a narrative. And I am so, when I worked at the Gresham Outlook, my first job out of college, I got $5 an hour, no car allowance for using my own car. I worked across the aisle from Debbie Dombrovnik, and the whole day was just me and her cold callings to cooking stories and spelling our names, Palahn. Yeah, that was a terrible time. It was a great place, though. Wow.
Still standing. But thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you. Long story. Please.
Hello. I feel like I should apologize in advance for this one, but first I want to thank you for reading the pedophilic prostitution story in a synagogue. That was great. Shana Tova to anyone who practices. My friend who introduced me to your writing, to him I made a joke that I would plague you with a circumcision joke. This was a joke, but then you made a circumcision joke, so now I feel beholden to actually do it. I will not spoil your most iconic work, so I will speak in the oblique hypothetical. If two of your characters were to hypothetically share a body but have ostensibly separate sexual experiences, if one of them is circumcised, is the other one also circumcised? I mean that.
That was pretty dense.
Okay. May I spoil Fight Club?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
brilliant.
please.
If Tyler and Joe share a body or are the same person but have ostensibly separate sexual experiences, if one of them is circumcised, is the other one also circumcised?
I would say yes, but it's kind of a moot point, because when I wrote Fight Club, I could not write sex. I still probably can't write sex. And so that's why all the humping came through the walls. It was all just a sound. Because I could write violence like crazy, yeah. But I just couldn't write a sexual scene. So, but going into that, what was the very first thing you had said something, about that pedophiliac thing.
Yeah.
Is that I tend to think of my stories as fairy tales for grown-ups.
Yeah.
Because when you're little and they read you fairy tales, the fairy tales are always about deny carnality, just do everything by the book, and eventually the prince will come and give you a kiss, and then you can be carnal for the rest of your life. But everybody I know just, they just jumped on board carnality the moment they could, and there was no they made all their mistakes by the time they were 13. They broke all the rules by the time they were 13 or 16. And so how do you find redemption after that? And so many of my stories are about people not being destroyed by having made the mistake, but by, finding redemption beyond, having, done the thing we were told not to do, which I think is a much more useful skill for the people I know.
Well, I wish you many wonderful mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a beautiful dress. Sir.
In speaking about violence, I'm glad you brought that up. In my mind, when I read your work, for some reason, it reminds me of Bret Easton Ellis, particularly American Psycho, Less Than Zero, that type of nihilistic twist. So I guess I have a question, two-part question. One, what's your philosophy about writing violence? And has Bret Easton Ellis ever influenced that philosophy, or at least are you aware of him in your sphere? Interested in your thoughts.
Actually, I'm friends with Bret Easton Ellis. I tend to be friends with people who really go against the grain, like Andrew Sullivan and Bret Ellis, people who can just kind of stand up and be in people's faces. I wish I could be more that way. So I think I kind of gravitate towards those people who can be a little antagonistic. My philosophy with violence has always been that it had to be consensual and structured. That, especially in Fight Club, it always had to be mutually agreed upon terms for violence, because there are some things that you could not discover about yourself unless you were able to engage in that kind of activity. And so, you know, I really don't like stories where someone is victimized. I avoid stories like that. I don't want to write stories like that, unless I'm writing it from the victim's point of view, where the victim finds their own redemption, and that they find a way to seize power. We have a power reversal by the end of what I did over summer vacation. And so I won't write a story where people are simply, you know, repeatedly victimized. But I do love Brett's collection, The Informers, because I think there is something really deeply heartbroken and sad, but also incredibly menacing. There's that one scene where the weather forecaster, Cheryl, has gotten off the late night news, and she goes to Cantor's Deli. And she's sitting there as a recognizable public figure in an otherwise empty restaurant. And these punk kids come in, and they just approach her since she's a public figure, and they start bringing her trash off the floor and saying, Cheryl, hey, Cheryl, would you sign this? Would you write to my greatest, biggest fan, Cheryl? And that is one of the most terrifying scenes I have ever read in fiction, because she's trapped by these really scary kids, and she's a public figure, and there's nobody around. And I'd never thought being a public figure could be that dangerous. And yeah, The Informers. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question from someone watching virtually. This is from Rich in St. Louis. Do you approach writing differently depending on the medium? For example, writing a novel like Fight Club compared to writing a graphic novel like the sequel?
Yeah, you know, every medium has its own strengths and its own structure, its own transitional devices. And with comics, with graphic novels, it's great because you don't have to write the transition. The eye moves from one panel to the next panel to the next panel. And so the transitions are incredibly easy to do. But in comics, the only place you have to surprise the reader is what they call a page turn reveal. So the reader is holding the comic, and as soon as they turn the page, they can see both pages. They get some general idea of what's going to happen on those pages. So that means the only place you can really surprise them is to have a setup at the bottom of the right-hand page, so that as they turn the page, there's a payoff at the top of the left-hand page. And it's called a page turn reveal. And the downside is that it means comics have to be incredibly well plotted, because you've got to have a really strong setup and payoff every 2 pages. And most novels don't have a huge setup and payoff, you know, every 10 pages or every 20 pages or every 800 pages in some cases. You've got to have more setups and payoffs in comics than any other form, because the reader is expecting every time you turn that page, there's going to be a payoff. But the transitions manage themselves. And then going to long-form prose, I already talked about how finding a repetitive device like a phrase, something that acts as a kind of touchstone, as a rhythm machine, that little drum machine, is another great way of doing transitions. Yeah, I don't read very much long-form prose, simply because I can't put up with these kind of 19th century, meanwhile, years and years went by. The sun rose and fell. Many grapes were harvested before Nathaniel came back to the village. Oh my God, those long, abstract, wordy, vague, taking us through time. I just can't stomach that. I think we can cut story much more effectively. And when you go into a bar and there's that guy holding forth, or that woman telling that great story. She's not saying, oh, and then many moons went by. Yeah, she's cutting story the way oral storytellers cut stories. Oh, I gotta toss this in. Boy, in 1980, I think it was, Whoopi Goldberg had a Broadway show called Whoopi on Broadway. And I'm gonna spoil it for you. When I was 18, I saw it on HBO. And she does this routine, it's on YouTube, and it's Whoopi Goldberg as a surfer chick. And it is incredibly funny. It's about valley speak, it's on and on and on. And the thing lasts 7 minutes, and you are roaring with laughter. She has to stop so much during that monologue. It's so funny, she has to wait for the laugh for so much of it. And then she ends up pregnant, and that's the whole second act, is she's gotten pregnant by a surfer. And then the church throws her out, her mother throws her out, she ends up stopping by a dry cleaner's, she gets a coat hanger, she goes to a filthy public bathroom, and she says, and this is what you do, is you pull the coat hanger out until it's one big piece of metal, and then you stick it up inside yourself, and you pull. Nobody's laughing at that point. She takes that story from the funniest thing you've ever heard to the most shocking, tragic thing you've ever heard. And by the end, you hear suppressed weeping in the audience. It is a magnificent story. And when I've talked to Rogan, and Rogan says, no, comedy should just be comedy. It should be people like saying the truth. I'm like, no, comedy needs to have an arc. Because if Whoopi Goldberg can do an arc like that, that's what I want to do. An arc that starts funny and ends up in this completely dark place, breaks your heart. Oh my God. That Whoopi Goldberg monologue just set up the rest of my life. But comics, every medium does have the thing you play to. You play to the immediacy, you play to the best way to manage the transitions. I think we've only got time for a couple more questions, so whoever was next.
I'll go. All right. So I've been writing for a few years, and it's basically always been under stress. So I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, how do you think your work might differ, either the process or the quality or the enjoyment when you're under stress versus when things have been more relaxed?
Boy, when you're under stress. When you're under stress, it's usually, in my experience, it means just before it kind of, a flip gets switched and switches into the absurdist. God. I remember years ago taking dying people to their hospice support groups when I was a volunteer. And at one point, people were talking about their latest opportunistic infections. And people were talking about their organic brain dimension. And the room was just getting sadder and sadder and sadder and sadder. And then somebody started to laugh. And it's at that moment where there's so much grief in the room, so much pain in the room, that something invisible happens. And it becomes, you're suddenly present to the absurdism of life. And everyone's suddenly laughing that it could not get any sadder, so suddenly it switched to this absurdist laughter, which is, in a way, I think so much of that shock laugh, like in Pulp Fiction when Uma Thurman gets the needle in her chest. I laughed, but not because it was funny, because it was kind of a screaming laugh. And so when the pain gets bad enough, then you can finally go to that place. The last thing I wrote in summer vacation was I had the whole thing written, and weeks later, I thought, I have had death panting over me, and I have had death finish inside me. And I thought, I can't put that in. That's too much. And then it went in. So in a way, what you're talking about, I always think, is the struggle between the truth that you know is there and your ability or your courage to actually go there and put that thing in that is just too much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Throughout your novels, you do a fantastic job of presenting scenarios that are obscure and horrific. And I'm curious, what about our modern world or perhaps the future actually terrifies you?
Boy, that's a kind of a tricky question, because to my mind, horror always arises from the things that we can't talk about. So if we can readily articulate what the thing is, then it's not the thing. And for years, the writer Ira Levin, I'm going to get all choky, he really liked my book Diary, and he endorsed it, he did a lot to promote it, and we started corresponding. And he and Ira Levin wrote Rosemary's Baby. Oh my God. He wrote Stepford Wives. He wrote everything. He was my hero. And at one point I sucked it up and I said, is Rosemary's Baby really about thalidomide? Because when the neighbor is sewing the booties, and Rosemary observes they look more like they're being made for claws instead of hands and feet. And later, when Laura Louise looks into the crib when the baby is born, she says, look at its hands, look at its feet. And this malformation of hands and feet is such a distinctive aspect of thalidomide. And at the time that Rosemary's Baby was written, women had been just given this thing. Like Minnie Castevet is giving Rosemary these pills and these drinks, and everyone's just saying, don't question it, just read it. Don't read any books, don't ask anybody's advice, just do what I say. Just do it. And so Rosemary, is the stand-in, the surrogate for all these women who are just taking thalidomide. Just do it. The doctor knows what's good for you. And Ira Levin, he told me that he wanted to write a horror novel that was, what if you were gestating a child, but you didn't know the true nature of the child. And The Midwich Cuckoos had already been written. It was a big book in the 50s that was turned into Village of the Damned. And he never said exactly as much, but Rosemary's Baby was about thalidomide. And it landed so incredibly hard in the culture because at the time, no one could talk about thalidomide. It was just such an enormous unresolved tragedy that no one could look at it. Nobody could name it. There was so much pain there. And so that's kind of the problem with your question. That if I can say it, if I can articulate it, it's not the thing. No, I can't articulate it, but it's there, and we all know it's there. So, and somebody will start writing a book and think it's about one thing, and it'll be about, that's always the thing, is you trick yourself into writing about the thing that you can't consciously write about. And then after the fact, I don't think Ira knew what he was writing about. I really don't. And I think that after it came out and it landed so hard, he was terrified that somebody would. Shirley Jackson with The Lottery, it was only decades later, decades after she was dead, that people said, this is really about the draft lottery, isn't it? That's why people reacted so violently to it. So no, I can't answer your question.
We can take 2 more questions,
Okay.
one from each line. Thank you.
So, not including your own, what is a book that you would suggest to people to know you better personally? Not like your favorites. And oh, apologies. Did you hear that? Okay.
Boy, I'm going to give you 2 books. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
The first one would be the complete work of Amy Hempel. Years ago, I was shipped to Barcelona with David Sedaris, Michael Chabon, Jonathan Latham, and Heidi Ulevitz. And the first night we were there, we all went to a bar and got a little loaded, and everyone said, "Who's your favorite author?" And of all those people, they all said, Amy Hempel. She writes fantastically beautiful stories that are really the most perfect form of minimalism, in that you can open an Amy Hempel book at any point, just let it fall open. And her sentences, her paragraphs are so incredibly strangely written that each one is its own reward. And that's the glory of minimalism, is that minimalism focuses on getting the sentence so incredibly perfectly right that you don't have to read 800 pages for the payoff. Every passage is its own payoff, is its own wow. You can open Amy Hempel, read a passage, and feel this completion. Where this summer, I reread Raise the Titanic. Raise the Titanic is like 600 pages that ends with a shit ending. Because in modernism, every sentence is saying, story is that way, keep going, story, there'll be a payoff, story, up that way, keep going, yep, couple more miles, keep going. Every story is just this banal thing that is just pushing you forward. And you're just praying that after you read 800 pages of banal sentences, that the destiny will not be a rotted body falling out of a vault. Oh, I gave it away. So Amy Hempel would be one book. Another book would be, this summer, I also reread The Martian Chronicles. And I had forgotten just what a huge impact that had on me as a child. The Martian Chronicles is what they call a fix-up novel that Ray Bradbury, back in the 1940s, he had a bunch of short stories that had been published once in magazines. And an editor had come to him and said, if we take these 6 or 8 stories and you write these kind of interstitial interludes between them, and maybe a few more stories, I think you've got a fix-up novel. You can cobble them together, quilt them together, and make a novel. And he did that. And I read that as a child, and I was so captivated by that constant variation of texture. You had first-person stories, you had second-person stories, you had third-person stories, you had interludes, you had these kind of poetic portions, and you never really got bored. There was always a really brand new, vibrant thing that would just be at the next page turn. And that really had a huge effect on me. And so that's why I'm always, in my own writing, constantly trying to, like a DJ, constantly trying to change the rhythm and the beat as I write a short story or as I write a novel. Irving Welsh is a good friend of mine, the train spotting guy. And I think this is definitely why Irving is also a DJ, is that he just loves this cutting together, this sampling, this kind of homaging, as you're getting away from formal modernism, and you're cutting together as many different storytelling forms, like you would mix music. So Martian Chronicles, complete works of Amy Hempel, don't read Raise the Titanic.
All right. Thank you very much.
Please.
So on the topic of writing and vulnerability, what do you do when putting yourself into all of this writing? Because you write such fucked up stuff. And there are pieces of you in it that are throughout the things. How do you deal with that when being critiqued and writing in general?
You know, my teacher, going back to Tom Spanbauer, you know, the gentleman who died a couple of weeks ago, Tom had a form of writing in his workshop. He called it dangerous writing. And Tom said that you have to write from a really deep, unresolved something of yourself, because there is really no hope that you're ever going to get published or recognized or paid for your work. So at least if every time you come back to the page, you are exploring this aspect of yourself, at least you're getting that kind of a reward, that there is this unresolved thing that is bringing you back to the page. And that's as much of a reward as you can hope. And ideally, you're doing it through a metaphor. And so a lot of times, you don't know what you're writing about. And that's the best way. Because if you know what you're going to be writing about, you won't go there. It's all about charming yourself, fooling yourself into going to a place that you would not go consciously. And ultimately fooling your reader into going to a place that they would not go consciously. It's about seducing them to that place that you didn't know you were going to yourself. So it's not like I do it consciously. It's not like I do it deliberately. Is that eventually, you know, I realize, oh my gosh, that's what I was really writing about. Henry James always said, the writer sells for $2 to strangers the secrets he would not tell his closest friends. And so once you get the book written, you spend the rest of your life saying, no, it's not about thalidomide. Yeah. But thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you so much. And thank you to the hall. I appreciate it very much. And parking must be terrible tonight. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you so much to Chuck Palahniuk, and thank you all for joining us. Please stay seated while our guest makes his way backstage. If you purchased a drink from the bar, please put your reusable cup in one of the yellow bins on your way out. We appreciate your help with our sustainability efforts. You can exit using the main